Hungary is a Central European country whose capital city, Budapest, is bisected by the Danube River. Hungary is bordered by Slovakia, Ukraine, Austria, Romania, Serbia, Croatia, and Slovenia. With a population of about 10 million inhabitants, Hungary reached its golden age in relatively modern times by the 15th century, eventually coming under the Habsburg rule to then form the Austro-Hungarian Empire together with Austria. Back around the 4th century, the power vacuum caused by the decline of the Roman Empire allowed armed Germanic tribes to settle in Hungary, including the Longobards, who had moved south from northern Germany into Hungary, and from there, in 568, they invaded Italy, going on to rule most of the Italian peninsula from 568 to 774. The Longobards descended from a small tribe called the Winili, who dwelt in southern Scandinavia before migrating to seek new lands. In the 1st century AD, they formed part of Suebi in northwestern Germany. The Suebi are first mentioned by Julius Caesar in connection with the invasion of Gaul. During the reign of Augustus, the Suebi expanded southwards, establishing a Germanic presence in the immediate areas north of the Danube. The Suebi were also known as the Alemanni, which is what most of the non-English speaking world calls Germany today, Alemannia, and from where Swabia gets its name, not to mention New Swabia, a territory annexed by Nazi Germany and explored by the famous German expedition in 1938 aboard the Schwabenland.
In the final days of the Second World War, American troops discovered a vast hoard of secret Nazi files hidden in a cave in central Germany. The documents reveal one of the Third Reich's most shadowy projects, the hunt to discover the lost Aryan civilization from which the Nazis believed they had descended. The lost island of Atlantis.
Hitler saw world history in terms of the struggle between races for the survival of the fittest, and he thought that races were distinct. So there's an absolute distinction between the Aryan race, by which he basically means the Germans, and the other different races. The Aryan race were a master race.
Hitler's belief in a historical Aryan master race was unshakable. Since the early 1920s, he had made his belief in the hierarchy of races one of the central pillars of Nazism. The symbols from different countries, thousands of miles apart, were too similar to be explained away as simple coincidence. They must come from one shared source, a lost civilization. The lost civilization must have originated on the mythical island of Atlantis. The legend was true.
Wirth located Atlantis as an own continent west of Portugal and southwest of Great Britain Island. People lived there in peace and harmony. It was a kind of ideal life. It was his paradise.
But this paradise had not lasted. Atlantis had met its end in a devastating global catastrophe. The seas had risen and drowned the island. It had sunk out of memory and into myth. A few brave Atlanteans did survive and set sail for the high places of the world.
They wandered onto both sides of the Atlantic, and they took with them their culture.
These displaced Atlanteans had seeded great civilizations all over the globe. In 1945, the files of an SS research institute known as the Ahnenerbe were discovered in a cave in central Germany, part of the sacred religious texts of the lost Aryans of Atlantis.
Himmler wanted to press forward with the idea of a Germanic religion, involving things like sun worship, the worship of the old god. He thought he was genuinely researching an archaic Germanic religion.
He began his religious project in miniature, inside the ranks of his beloved SS.
Heinrich Himmler had immense ambitions for the SS. It wasn't simply a police force. He wanted it to be the model for a future Germany.
He even instigated pagan-like rituals at each of the solstices.
By going back to the old Germanic religion and infusing the SS with its spirit, he would, of course, strengthen their will.
They were his new Aryan aristocracy.
In the heart of Bremen, in northern Germany, stands an extraordinary building. Completed in 1931, Haus Atlantis was designed as an institute for the study of Atlantis and the Aryan super race. The building's facade was originally adorned by a large wooden sculpture depicting the Nordic god Odin crucified on the Tree of Life. Inside Haus Atlantis, an astonishing stairwell, built of glass and steel. It may evoke the Aryan exodus from Atlantis. At the top, the visitor enters a mysterious room. Known as the Heavens Hall, this was to be the teaching forum.
This Atlantis was not somewhere in the Mediterranean or something like that, but in the North Atlantic region. In Atlantis, 20 to 25,000 years ago, a Nordic race was created that was to control and influence the development of mankind to a strong degree.
In 1935, Himmler joins forces with Wirth to establish the Ahnenerbe, an elite SS unit consisting of archaeologists, scientists, and historians. Their mission? To search the sacred sites of the world for evidence that the Aryans of Atlantis were not mythological. They actually existed.
As head of the SS, Himmler was fascinated by the idea of proving the supremacy of the Nordic race. And he was the strongest supporter of archaeologists researching on prehistoric German grounds.
The Ahnenerbe turned their focus on ancient sacred sites, among them the Externstein. A major excavation begins, commanded by Wilhelm Teut. The Externstein was used for sacred rituals by Nordic German descendants of the Aryans, thousands of years before it became a Christian sacred site.
During the search for their Germanic Nordic roots, the Externstein comes to symbolize pure German heritage. The excavations at the Externstein become Himmler's pet project.
Meanwhile, Himmler sends Ahnenerbe teams across the world to hunt for proof of the German people's Aryan origins.
The 19th century German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, who in 1873 had discovered the real lost city of Troy, a place once dismissed as purely mythical. At the time, Schliemann's discovery was an international sensation, and his method was revolutionary. He'd found the legendary city by following clues locked away in the text of Homer's The Iliad, turning fiction into historical fact.
While globalist professors in the world's most prestigious universities, even today, denounce the Nazis' fanciful theories regarding an inhabitation of Atlantis during the Pleistocene, keep in mind that during the entire first half of the 20th century, for almost 50 years, spanning the entire period of the Nazi regime, all textbooks of the United States, Great Britain, and all of their universities, except for Nazi Germany, of course, subscribed to the fake missing link known as Piltdown Man, proudly displayed in the British Museum as a fraudulent explanation of European history, only to be infamously exposed as a hoax, a fake. While today, 70 years after the end of World War II, we are finding 6'6" tall blonde Aryan mummies by massive pyramids in Asia, exactly where the Nazi archaeologists said Atlantean survivors re-established agricultural civilization from, spreading their culture into Europe, the Indian subcontinent, and other places. As it turns out, the United Nations-backed anthropology is nothing more than politicized fake news, which promotes Afrocentric egalitarian fairy tales and whose governments ironically still tout old Nazi science as their greatest technological achievements.
The Piltdown discovery was largely fragments from a skull and a partial lower jaw. It was a tremendous breakthrough to find what seemed to be a missing link, and that word was very important. Darwin had predicted that there should be some kind of ancestral form for the African great apes and humans, and the Piltdown skull fitted that beautifully, because it was actually a human skull with an orangutan lower jaw, and so you had this big brain with a primitive jaw.
Is this which one is it?
Oh, chimpanzee, modern man, and...
Mr. Piltdown, may I?
I would be happy to pick it up for you, but I'm afraid I can't let you touch it. We felt that our last meeting was unfortunate. Lest you get a notion our little find here is anything other than genuine, well, you can see for yourself.
Looks real to me.
The thing about the Piltdown skull is it was beautifully designed. All of the key parts were missing. And so there was a tremendous latitude for individual interpretation. I mean, it was brilliant from that point of view.
It's a fake, isn't it?
What's a fake?
You're Piltdown Man. This thing that's taken the world by storm, the discovery of this century. It's all made up, a hoax. Come on, don't be shy.
There's been many fakes, many tries at fakes, but the scientific community, thank goodness, has, after lots of perseverance, including think about the Piltdown fake, it took a long time for them to prove, or Oakley to come up with the actual proof that it was fake.
During the Holocene, or after the Ice Age, Europe was resettled from Scandinavia, but also from Mesopotamia, which means land between two rivers, by people whose ancient religious philosophies still live on today, some very publicly and others in a more covert way. The Manichaeism movement starts with Mani, a title meaning the illustrious, who was of noble Persian ancestry and at age 12 claimed to have had a mystical experience, later proclaiming himself a sort of messiah in the 3rd century, the year 242 to be exact, saying, and I quote, "As once Buddha came to India, Zoroaster to Persia, and Jesus to the lands of the West, so came in present time this prophecy through me, the Mani, to the land of Babylonia." Calling himself the apostle of the true God, Mani managed to gain a large following, but eventually died in prison awaiting execution. He was crucified and had his corpse flayed, the skin stuffed, then hung up at the city gate. But his religion continued on, and can be considered a form of Gnosticism. His movement focused on dualism, which is good and evil, light and darkness, where cosmic light is said to have been imprisoned in matter, and therefore it is diffused throughout all of nature. To set the light substance free from the pollution of matter was the ultimate aim of all Manichaean life. Those who entirely devoted themselves to this work were called the elect, or the perfect. They were forbidden to have property, to eat meat or drink wine, to gratify any sexual desire, to engage in any servile occupation, commerce, or trade, to possess a house or home, to practice magic, or to practice any other religion. They forbade all evil words and all evil food. Animal food was said to have roused the demon of darkness within man, hence only vegetables were allowed to the perfect. Amongst vegetables, some as melons and fruit containing oil were specially recommended, as they were thought to contain many light particles, and by being consumed by the perfect, those light particles were set free. He believed in reincarnation and tried to incorporate all other religions into his philosophy. They were against marriage and regarded it as an evil in itself, because children meant the continual imprisonment of the light substance or soul in matter. That said, they encouraged homosexuality, orgies, sodomy, and activities that did not result in offspring. For example, oral sex. Their sex rituals focused on virility rather than fertility, and their goal was to attain as much sexual arousal as possible without any fornication, without, that is to say, ejaculation. They would then attempt to transmute the sexual energy into a spiritual and creative force, which the Chinese call qi or ki, the Hindus refer to as prana, and the Nazi Germans called vril. Prayer was obligatory 4 times a day, at noon, late in the afternoon, after sunset, and 3 hours later. Prayer was facing the sun, or in the night the moon, and when neither the sun nor moon was visible, then the north, the throne of the Light King. They all fasted on the first day of the week in honor of the sun. The perfect also fasted on the second day in honor of the moon. A monthly fast was also observed until sunset on the 8th day of the month. Catharism was a Christian Gnostic movement that thrived in some areas of southern Europe, particularly what is now northern Italy and southern France, between the 12th and 14th centuries. The followers were known as Cathars, and their beliefs were said to have been brought from Persia and were greatly influenced by concepts rooted in the Manichaean philosophy.
Another German scholar was drawn in 1936. His name was Otto Rahn, and he offered Himmler the possibility of securing the most powerful ancient relic of all, the Holy Grail.
For me, Otto Rahn was the original Man in Black, the spook, the black fedora and black coat, the shadow out of history. Trying to penetrate who Rahn really was is certainly a tricky one.
As a boy, Rahn had been obsessed with the legends of King Arthur and the story of a knight called Parzival, who had searched his whole life for the Holy Grail.
At some point after leaving school, Otto seems to have become increasingly determined to find the Grail itself, a mythical object which will really make one whole again, which will heal the wounded and heal the world's pain. The lost link between man and God.
For Rahn, the Grail wasn't just a literary subject, it was a real physical object. and he was looking for anything that might have clues to that.
Parzival is the story of a knight's quest for the Holy Grail, culminating in its discovery at the mythical castle of Munselvash, high on a lonely mountain. Like Schliemann, Rahn searched the text for clues to the location of the legendary Grail Castle. His quest took him to France in 1931, and he travelled south to an area of the French Pyrenees locally known as Grail Country, a region that still entices Grail hunters to this day. There, high in the mountains, he caught his first glimpse of the ancient fortress of Montségur. Could this isolated ruin really be Parzival's Munselvash, the home of the Holy Grail? Its impregnable location certainly matched the text, but there was another more significant clue. One not based on myth, but on hard historical fact. In the 13th century, at around the time the Parzival legend was written down, Montségur had been the scene of the last stand of a dissident religious order known as the Cathars, the legendary keepers of the Grail.
The Cathars were the biggest threat the medieval church faced and were dubbed the Great Heresy as a result. They were a fully independent counter-church, totally opposed to the Church of Rome.
But Rome would not stand for their heresy, and in 1209, the Pope ordered a bloody crusade against the Cathars. This crusade saw the slaughter of over 100,000 people, making it one of the bloodiest events in European history, the genocide of an entire faith.
The papal legate is said to have issued the notorious command, "Kill them all, God will know his own." It was a pretty bloodthirsty period. There was general rape, pillage and looting, mass burnings and executions, whole towns being put to the sword. The one major place that the Cathars were still holed up and the one major castle that hadn't fallen was Montségur.
The castle was besieged for months, until eventually the few hundred remaining Cathars had no option but surrender. But something did survive the Inquisition's flames. In 1931, more than 700 years later, Otto Rahn unearthed a local legend about a mysterious Cathar treasure.
One of the legends that's grown up around the Cathars is that they possessed a treasure. During the siege, 4 Cathars are said to have scaled down the side of Montségur in the middle of the night with something, the Cathar treasure. History stops when those 4 men went down the side of Montségur into the night and vanished.
This legend was the clue that Rahn had been searching for. The Cathar treasure must be the Grail, and it had remained hidden ever since their fall. Acting on local folklore, Rahn spent many months crawling through the hundreds of miles of subterranean passages that riddle the mountains surrounding Montségur. As he dug deeper, he began to believe that these ancient heretics were not Christians at all, but believers in something far older, a lost religion. Finally out of money, Rahn was forced to abandon his quest and wrote a book about the persecuted Cathars, their ancient religion, and what he believed to be the truth about the Grail.
Otto Rahn published in 1933 a book called The Crusade Against the Grail. Although he got some good reviews in Germany and sold modestly, he certainly wasn't a successful author.
During 1935 and 36, Rahn travelled incessantly, often accompanied by a small troop of SS men. He travelled through Italy, France and Spain, as well as venturing north through Scotland as far as Iceland. His reports were marked top secret and were for the eyes of Himmler and his closest advisors alone. He recorded his journeys in his second book, an enigmatic travel diary.
Otto Rahn published a second book called Lucifer's Court in 1937, where the Cathars are seen as effectively good Arians fighting the evil Judaic menace of the Church of Rome.
We are the people of Nordic blood, who call ourselves the Cathars. Our heaven speaks only to the pure ones, to Aryans, the noble and lordly.
Just as Wirth's Atlanteans had become the ancient Aryans, so too had Rahn's beloved Cathars, and believed that after the great flood that had sunk the island of Atlantis, a few survivors had sought refuge in the high places of the world. Some of these intrepid Aryans had arrived in ancient Tibet, and amongst the snow-capped peaks founded a great civilization. There is a reference to small traces of the Nordic race present in the anthropology of the people of Tibet. No doubt to Himmler, this was the remnant of the master race that he had been expecting to find. If Aryan blood did survive in Tibet, then Atlantis, a lost religion, and a once great people, must be true. But for Himmler, Tibet's fallen Aryans were ultimately a moral lesson from history, an example of what happens if the racially superior interbreed with inferior races.
Over time, these superior Nordic peoples mixed with the lesser peoples that they ruled. And as a result, they themselves decayed as a culture. The empire fell. And the implication of that was that miscegenation, mixing with inferior races, was very dangerous. Your own superior race would be brought low by the lesser peoples that surrounded you. Racial mixing, from their point of view, is the road to catastrophe.
Right up until his death, Otto Rahn believed that the Grail remained safely hidden in the countryside surrounding Montségur. He wrote,
"It lies in a cave in the Tabor forest. A massive stone block protects the cave's entrance from intruders, and the treasure itself is guarded by hundreds of vipers."
Of course, since the end of World War II, Nazi anthropology and things like the search for the Holy Grail fell out of favor, except for maybe in movies such as Indiana Jones, replaced by the United Nations, an organization that was birthed in large part thanks to a man that Hitler despised and openly called a bastard, Count Kalergi, who promoted his perception of a more acceptable globalist view of history and a more acceptable Marxist political future.
Count Kalergi devised this plan whereby he wants to destroy the ethnicity of every European. He wants Europe to not have anymore their own single ethnicity. And that's why they're pushing all these immigrants to cross the Mediterranean and come into Europe. They are basically destroying Europe by doing that. We don't have anything racistic against anyone, of course, but what they're doing is completely criminal. And they're actually financing these people once they come to Italy. They have more rights than the Italians. They give them houses, they give them hotels, they even give them 30 euro a day so they can buy and pay for the mobile phones, for their things. I mean, they're treated better. There is no social security here in Italy, but still, these immigrants have everything. So Italians are, of course, getting more and more mad every day. And this is all because of the Kalergi plan to destroy the ethnicity of Europeans.
My name is Robert Sepper. I'm an anthropologist and author. Please check out my published work available on Amazon.com. I appreciate your sharing, liking, and commenting on these videos. Please don't forget to subscribe, even if you have already, as I'm told that social media platforms are unsubscribing people, so my apologies if that has happened to you. Have a wonderful and safe weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.